Story 1. When I realized I was the only one fighting to keep the relationship alive, I knew love cannot survive when it is one-sided. Story 2. I realized they were just using me as a placeholder until they found someone better. Story 3. Trust. Once it was broken for me, no amount of love could glue it back. Story 4. I realized I was more in love with the version of them in my head than with the actual person. Once that clicked, the ick appeared quickly and never left. Story 5. Only time apart has ever lessened my feelings for someone. I have 2 exes with whom I did not split amicably. I still yearned for them for years after we broke up. I was cheated on by both, and I ended the relationships because of that. I still love them for the good memories and emotions they brought, and I sometimes yearn for what I lost, but I no longer trust them. Story 6. Realizing they did not respect me the way I respected them hurt my feelings. Story 7. When someone says one thing but does the complete opposite or does nothing at all, I do not know which is worse. Story 8. Seeing her look at the new guy the way she used to look at me made my heart go cold. I began the process of asking her to leave in the calmest and most cordial way. I kept it respectful, even though I really wanted to rage out and beat the guy's ass. I knew it would change nothing and I would more than likely be arrested, so I took a handful of mushrooms, cried about it, deleted all our pictures, closed my laptop, watched cartoons, and eventually slept for about 10 hours. The next day I felt amazing. I moved out of the place we shared and started moving on. It was a rocky road, but with some lucky breaks I can honestly say I am happier not to be with her anymore. You learn a lot about a person once you sit and reflect. The mushrooms definitely helped. Thanks for reading if you made it this far. Story 9. I realized I had invested much of my life doing most of the work to keep the relationship alive, while he gave the bare minimum and acted as if he had done a great deal for us. Story 10. His mother was controlling, and I felt he allowed her to dominate his life. I knew I would not be able to deal with that. Story 11. Discovering that they were willing to do for someone else what they would not do for me. Story 12. He started dating someone 31 years younger than him. I told him that this was the same age gap between my father and me. Story 13. He is not interested. I accept it, feel sad for a short time, dust myself off and move on. There is no use wallowing in sadness after being rejected. Story 14. When I moved in with them, I saw how useless they were around the house, with no initiative for cooking, cleaning, or other tasks. Story 15. I used to be really into this guy until one night on FaceTime he started randomly venting and said, "Paying child support is worse than being raped because child support lasts for 18 years and being raped only lasts for one night." I was completely disgusted. I immediately hung up and blocked him on all platforms. Story 16. If they show interest in someone else, whether I am in love with them or just infatuated, that is the end for me. Story 17. I found out she had 4 other men in rotation and 2 women. We all thought we were dating her exclusively. It blew up in her face in spectacular fashion, and I dated one of her women for a couple of fun months afterward. Story 18. I realized that no matter how much I do, they will never prioritize me the way I prioritize them. I was talking to a woman who was short on cash, so she asked if I could help. I transferred the money and sent a screenshot to show the transaction was completed. Then she left me on read. It was not until the next day that she said thank you. Took me hours to earn that money. It takes seconds to type a simple thank you. Another woman I was talking to lives in another city, about 4 hours away. Sometimes I go there to take care of things and I always tell her well in advance when I will be there. She would never commit to hanging out. She would say things like, "If I am free, we can hang out," or something similar. When she came to my area or hometown, I would set aside any plans to see her. If you are not free, fine. But if you are not going to commit because you would rather leave the door open for something else, that just means I am not much of a priority. Story 19. When he wanted me back, I was only interested in the idea of him, more in dreaming about him than in being with him. It has happened a few times. I was in love with being in love, rather than actually being in love. Story 20. Their unmitigated people-pleasing stems from trauma, and they believe their intention is to bring happiness to others. It is awful to be in a relationship with someone who avoids their own emotional work because they do not believe you can handle an honest conversation or even slight discomfort. Do not project your avoidance onto me. Demand that I read your mind, and then expect me to act as an on-call therapist and cheerleader. People-pleasing only benefits those who feel entitled to others' lack of boundaries. Story 21. I finally realized I'd never be able to compete with the drugs she tried on and off for years. I was madly in love with her, but I could never compete with the liquid handcuffs, as she called them. Story 22. Horrendous personal hygiene, including barely wiping, washing hands rarely, and being oddly proud of it. Also treating me as lesser rather than as an equal in almost every situation. Story 23. I asked for support on a certain day well in advance. When the time came and I asked again, he left me to cry in someone else's arms and walked away while I was sobbing. I would never walk away from someone I love if I found them like that. He also cared more about sleeping with someone else that night than giving me any consideration. I woke up to them having sex in the bed next to me. I also realized I could not access subspace with him anymore because I no longer felt safe. My subconscious would not even let me be delusional. Story 24. He never defended me against his family or friends when issues arose. I was the last person he considered important. At first I thought he was giving them the benefit of the doubt, but when I had video and audio footage of a family member insulting me on my porch and he said nothing, I kicked him out. Story 25. I realized that whenever I try to talk and fix issues between us, he sees me as the problem, even when he repeats the same mistakes. I try to explain how his actions made me feel, but his words sometimes hurt me because he is insensitive. I also resent having to act as the man in the relationship, doing the planning, deciding where and what we eat, giving gifts, and pleading to spend time together or asking even for the bare minimum. I have also asked him to set boundaries with female friends with whom he previously had a romantic relationship. All of this has made me numb to his behavior, and I no longer want to deal with him. Story 26. He treated me like a last resort because he had no other options and assumed I would go back after he broke up with me last time over something someone said about him more than 10 years ago. There was also so much insecurity and whining. I thought absolutely not. Story 27. My ex-husband told me, "I feel like you don't have the right to complain," after I told him about a tough day. I wasn't a nagging wife. I was having a particularly hard day, and he had to one-up me on everything I said and tell me why his day was harder. I asked why it was a pissing match and why I couldn't just tell him about it. In that moment, I realized he had never respected me or seen me as my equal after 22 years together. Story 28. I realized every joke he made about me was actually veiled criticism. Took me a while to see it, but once I did, the butterflies died overnight. Story 29. When I was 30, I remember saying I could not still be doing this at 40. I turned 40, and she was still treating me like shit, so I ended it. I miss her. Every day is a fight, but it is for the best. Story 30. They chose to treat me this way and refused to own up to their nonsense. My heart may want him, but he needs to heal and work on himself. So I am going to explore other facets of life. May my heart make peace with disappointment. Story 31. I realized I was unhealthily attached to the first person who showed me kindness after my suicide attempt. Over the years, I realized they didn't see me the way I saw them. After a few events that hurt me, I decided it was healthier to detach and work on myself instead of depending on someone who wasn't dependable. There was another man I had a crush on. Every time we interacted, I felt something, but he would disappear for weeks or months, so I decided it was better to stop having feelings for him as well. Story 32. I lost my independence and ultimately my sexual attraction to them because of their controlling behavior. Story 33. Not having my back or supporting me. Always worrying about what other people will think of X, Y, and Z instead of just having fun together. Story 34. When I was around friends and felt safe with them, I realized I no longer felt the same way with my partner. Story 35. I realized I was just a pawn in their self-flagellation. They sabotaged our relationship out of self-loathing. The dramatics became too tiresome. I just wanted a partner who would have fun exploring our city with me. Story 36. He did not prioritize our relationship and had no backbone when it came to his ex. He lacked consideration for me and how his actions would impact me on many occasions. In the end, I finally came to my senses and realized nothing would ever change. He did not want to be proactive about quite serious situations concerning his children. He once said he would have no life if he took full custody of them, regardless of the fact their mother was not looking after them properly, left them alone regularly, and allowed them to live in very dirty conditions. That killed my respect for him. I could not continue. Story 37. Resentment is the #1 feeling killer. It grows when you feel unappreciated, taken for granted, or not respected. It builds when you express your feelings and the other person does not put in the effort to resolve them. It also grows when you feel you are investing far more in the relationship than the other person is. Story 38. I realized they cared more about themselves and their dreams than about working to build a future together. Story 39. I wanted him to be the man I could marry and have children with, but he could not grow up. When I realized that, my feelings immediately changed and I knew the relationship was over. Story 40. She became pregnant by someone else, then told me I had never done anything to prove I really loved her and said I could prove it by helping her raise a baby that was not mine. The shock felt like metal being quenched, going from hot to cold in an instant. I declined. The last I heard of her, 25 years ago, she was a single mother of 2. Story 41. Their repeated betrayals and setting a timeline for when I should be over it are damaging my mental health. Story 42. I realized he was kind to everyone else and would believe and care for them when they were not well. With me, he assumed I was faking or seeking attention. It was disheartening to see him treat friends and strangers more kindly than he treated me behind closed doors. Never again. Story 43. She voted for Trump again despite expressing her disdain for him. Story 44. He realized there were many unnecessary lies. He made a big deal about being allergic to mushrooms, but a year later he admitted he just didn't like them. If you're lying about something as inconsequential as food, what else are you lying about? Story 45. I caught my girlfriend at the time talking to her ex while we were both at work. We had been dating before we started working together. I did not think much of it, but that trust was misplaced. She did not know I had been in contact with the ex she went back to. I decided to wait to see what excuse she would give to break up with me. Her excuse was that she did not want to cheat on me, so this was the best thing she could do. She later said she wanted to focus on college. When she asked to be friends, I emotionally checked out. It was obvious. What really got to me was that she started posting about it on Instagram and then blocked me. I was portrayed as the bad guy and received threats. I am glad everything worked out. I am happily married. Story 46. I am finally accepting that I can never trust them. No matter how much healing and self-reflection I do, something always erodes my trust. Story 47. I realized he found me demanding when I was asking for the bare minimum. Story 48. Learning all the necessary things from here to move on swiftly. Story 49. He constantly looked down on me and spoke to me as if I were a child who needed everything explained, which became frustrating very quickly. Story 50. He reacted by giving me the cold shoulder when I called him out for being a jackass. I realized that if I stayed with him and married him as I had wanted, my entire life would be spent babying his feelings, and I was tired of doing that. I lost everything after breaking up with him, but now I live with my wife and our 2 cats in my dream city, so in the long run it could not have gone any better for me. Story 51. They were already seeing someone else. We remained good friends while we knew each other, but I never told them how I felt. It has been so long that those feelings are gone. Story 52. Lack of respect. Examples include instigating conflict with your friends, criticizing or berating you in front of strangers, talking shit about your family, and casually mentioning your flaws or mistakes to relatives. My ex was extremely entitled and ungrateful for the love and devotion I showed her, and she was delusional, seeing herself as a prize who deserved more. One day she would beg me to stay when I told her to pack her things and leave. On another day, she told my aunt about the time I got spooked by a passing dog in a way that felt emasculating. Story 53. His tendency to console himself rather than choose the relationship when challenged to step outside familiar boundaries made things difficult. I am generous in love, and he was painfully measured. Story 54. I was forced to be a mother to him instead of a lover. The two roles do not mix. Story 55. I saw him so happy with the girl he had left me for. I thought that was all I ever wanted for him to be happy. Seeing him happy made me realize it was time for me to be happy too. I was done. Story 56. I was the emotional backbone of the relationship. I made dates, holidays, and the wedding happen. I planned everything. I was clear that I needed words of affirmation and physical touch and affection, not just acts of service that do not even require me to be in the room. I appreciate that my laundry was sorted and folded, but I can do those things myself. I grew tired of being the cheerleader for us and eventually matched her energy. What really happened, though, is that I had a severe health scare a year and a half ago, and then my dad died. She was not present or aware enough to understand what I needed from her. At that point, I saw the gulf between us and realized I deserved more. After months passed, I realized I no longer loved us. I still love her. She will always be my family, but I no longer want to be her spouse and I am no longer in love with her. I told her I wanted to separate just before the summer. Story 57. It became clear he did not want to work. He would quit or be fired from every job and spent all his money on beer. I realized I no longer enjoyed spending time with him. He also took his frustrations out on me. The relationship had effectively ended before the breakup, and I could not continue. Story 58. When I realized I was always the one making the effort, love stopped feeling amazing. It was one-sided and felt like exhaustion disguised as devotion. Story 59. I found out that he had been lying to me for much longer than I wanted to acknowledge. He lied about finances, relationships, and everything. Once someone starts lying to their significant other, it is over. Story 60. I was with this person on and off from high school through college. They knew I had chronic illnesses and had been supportive and loving. After surgery for endometriosis, I was told my chances of conceiving naturally were low and that I would need treatments or in vitro fertilization. When I told my boyfriend, he said that unless I could give him children naturally, he would not marry me or waste his time on a woman who could not do what we are supposed to do. I suggested in vitro fertilization and treatments. He said, "God made you screwed up." When I offered adoption, he said, "I will not raise another man's children. You are making me a cuck." I ended the relationship and did not look back. I realized I had been a means to an end. He has since had multiple relationships and been dumped each time. I am now married to a wonderful man who loves me regardless of the fertility of my womb. We want children, and he is open to in vitro fertilization, treatments, surrogacy, or adoption. Story 61. He showed constant disregard for me and deliberately caused me pain. His only apology was, "Sorry you feel that way." Story 62. One day I realized he communicated only when he needed food, water, or some other favor. The rest of the time I felt invisible to him. I had done more than I could, and then it hit me. To test it, I asked him for a glass of water because I was on my period. He snapped and yelled. Story 63. When he told me, despite knowing I had been sexually abused as a child, that all sexual assault and abuse survivors had more control over what happened to them than they believed, I felt instant devastation and disgust. Story 64. When I realized all his jokes about me were just low-key insults, the butterflies died overnight. Story 65. When my mom was in the hospital dying, he told me he went to visit her but she was sleeping, so he did not bother her. She was never alone. He did not even have the room number, and I was completely done then. Story 66. When I realized I meant nothing to him, he had taken me for granted and broke up with me. Story 67. He was having sex with other women and denying it. Story 68. Their personality changed for the worse over time. Maybe I should have been more patient, but it became a relationship with an unreliable, constantly complaining partner. In the end, I can live a life with someone, not for someone. Story 69. He cheated a second time and lied about it, even though I had all the evidence. Hidden lingerie, earrings, and pieces of weave hanging on a towel rack. Story 70. His enmeshment with his mother and his failure to recognize her manipulative tactics harmed our marriage. Story 71. For me, it was when I started to see the patterns in their behavior that did not match the love I thought we had. The little things that used to seem cute or quirky became frustrating reminders of how we were incompatible. It was a slow realization that love was not enough to overlook the fundamental issues between us. Story 72. I woke up one day and realized I was the only one putting effort into the relationship. My feelings dried up. Story 73. It did not kill the feeling so much as it made me feel like an idiot for continuing to love him with everything I had, especially after he punched me in the face and refused to change or get help. Even after I found the courage to leave, I loved him. But I realized things had to change because he was not trying to fix the problem, and it could become dangerous if it continued. Story 74. Honestly, it was when I realized they were not who I thought they were, the moment the rose-colored glasses came off and I saw the red flags I had ignored. They were dismissive of my feelings and always made everything about themselves. It became exhausting, and I realized I deserved better. Story 75. I was not madly in love, but I had a crush on a kid in middle school. When we ended up in the same classroom, he was extremely annoying to our teacher, whom I really liked, so I got the ick and started avoiding him. Ironically, he asked me to date him shortly after I had already become grossed out by his behavior. Story 76. I did not know what the red pill alpha male thing was. He kept bringing it up, and I thought it was something about fitness or just men talking. He had huge hang-ups about being short. He told me he expected me to have a boy and a girl, raise them until they were 6, then get a full-time job while being a traditional wife. He had so much potential to be a nice partner, but he chose misogynistic behavior. Do you know how demeaning they are? There is another one who is worse. It is no wonder I have chosen to be single. Story 77. She wasn't giving me time. She kept saying she would set up calls or meet, but then never did or canceled. She messaged me at inconvenient times. She would say she wanted to share her thoughts instead of doing it right then, which made me anxious for days. It turned out she was punishing me because I overstepped a boundary related to her safety concerns. I ghosted her in retaliation, and she got a taste of her own medicine. Story 78. Constant queerphobia. It was driving me fucking nuts to see how much irrational hate I had to deal with. It was always weird talking about gay and transgender people, friends, family, coworkers, and so on. Despite both of us being straight, my sexuality was constantly questioned because my parents were gay and because I don't care if my friends are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. If she had a gay friend, the label was an indictment that meant they acted like the other gender or were just sassier than she preferred. Bisexual women were dismissed as lesbians who chose a man for a provider because it's easy, and bisexual men were called liars who should stop violating women's bodies as a disguise from being outed as gay. Transgender people were described as liars who trick people into relationships to seem normal, and as creeps who just want to use the other bathroom to spy on others. She did not have much to say about non-binary people, but she constantly talked down about studs, femboys, and other non-conforming stereotypes. There was a lot more associated with that. Overall, they were extremely socially conservative, and their obsession with scrutinizing and judging people intensified on that topic. Their insecurity toward me specifically was suffocating. Story 79. I said something mean about one of my friends behind her back. Goodbye. Story 80. I discovered he had no motivation or drive to progress in adult life. He had made no attempt to live independently of his parents in his 30s. He had been lying to me and others about his lack of work history, implying he had been employed more recently than he had. He blamed the job market, friends who told him to lie on. His resume about verifiable details like dates and qualifications, and artificial intelligence for his inability to find work. In reality, he had not truly tried to get a job for years. He blamed childhood bullies, a childhood brain injury, and mental health issues for his problems. I saw him being especially nice to his aging parents, who supported, housed, and fed him, without appreciating how much they did for him. I coached him to rewrite his resume and remove falsehoods and spent hours teaching interview techniques, but I realized he needed parenting and I did not want to provide that. When I broke up with him because he treated me badly, he ignored me, then checked himself into a psychiatric ward to avoid his problems for several days. He continued to shift blame, created a Discord server to tell everyone he was suicidal, and weaponized our friends against me. I loved him and was hopeful that if he got himself together we might try again, but after what he did that was no longer possible. Story 81. Abandonment with no explanation or warning changed how I viewed this person forever. It is sad when you see a future with someone and all they see is someone to take advantage of. Story 82. He had raging alcoholism and slapped me during one of those "I'm too drunk and out of it to care" episodes. After I brought it up, he smiled and asked, "Am I the most traumatic thing that has happened to you?" As if it were romantic. He was not the worst thing that had happened to me, but the way he asked that shocked me to my senses and made me realize it was not going to get better. Story 83. Realizing they did not respect me the way I respected them. Story 84. His mask fell off and I saw who he really was. He subjected me to physical, sexual, psychological, and verbal abuse, all exacerbated by excessive drug use. I have had extensive therapy to understand how I got into that situation and to process what he did to me. 6 years on, life is infinitely better. I am happy on my own and ready to be happy when I meet the right person. Story 85. He criticized my natural eyebrows. My heart dropped into my stomach. It felt like he was looking at me and only seeing flaws instead of recognizing that I am beautiful. It is strange because I never felt insecure until that comment. You do not notice your flaws until people point them out. Story 86. You chose that person over me. If you would rather be with someone so tacky and obnoxious, you are not who I thought you were. Story 87. I realized they never invested anything in the relationship. No emotional connection, active listening to understand, support or encouragement, love or romance. When I asked why they loved me, they said, "Because of how you make me feel." Story 88. Sometimes people will die on a hill and swear they love you, but their actions are nothing but malice. It is quite sobering when I tallied it up. Story 89. He kept telling me what his mother said about me and about us, even though I was rarely around for her to form an opinion. It makes me wonder what he said about me when I was not there and why he did not defend me when he repeated disrespectful remarks. Story 90. There comes a time, inevitably, when you stop lying to yourself and begin to see the true picture. That is when you realize that for a relationship to work, effort is required from both partners. Story 91. I realized he could not communicate. We would never talk things through because he would just leave and refuse to discuss it again. Unsurprisingly, the same problems arose and the cycle repeated. It was impossible. Story 92. She cheated. I still loved her and we tried to work through it, but I will always hate her. Do not waste time trying to recover a relationship after cheating. Story 93. He made a thoughtless, throwaway comment about my married sister's breasts while I was driving and on speakerphone with her, my brother, and his wife in the back seat. It was more a slow death than anything, but it started the unraveling. Story 94. I realized he was an abusive person who behaved like a giant toddler when he didn't get his way. I can't fix that. Story 95. I was burned repeatedly, and when I opened myself up for the last time, they still burned me, laughing my ass off. Story 96. He treated me like a joke and an option. I am a very loyal, forgiving person and, although not perfect and with my own issues and trauma, I have a heart of gold. I admittedly catch feelings quickly. If I rock with you, I rock with you and will almost do anything for you out of love. But when this is consistently treated as weakness and you want to do me dirty because you think you can get away with it because I will always forgive you and give you another chance, then we have a problem. Just about every person I catch feelings for does this to me. Maybe I'm the problem, too trusting, too forgiving, too nice, too understanding. He thinks that because I don't love him anymore I never loved him at all, when it is the complete opposite. He treated me the same way the men before him did. That's why my feelings are gone. Since he stalks me and often finds me on social media, I hope he is reading this. Story 97. He said he liked my thigh gap because it was easier to get there when I was anorexic. Also, when I was involuntarily admitted to a mental hospital for that reason, he left me. I laughed, but I was upset. Story 98. When he asked my parents for their blessing to propose and got the jeweler's information, we looked at rings so I could decide what I wanted him to make. Months passed. 6, 12, then nearly 18 without a proposal, and he became angry whenever I asked what was going on. His lack of respect for my time, energy, and love ended the relationship and any positive feelings I had toward him. Story 99. She started blaming me for her shortcomings, projecting the guilt from her cheating onto me. There was nothing wrong with the present, yet she blamed me for her financial problems and for still being in college, even though I never bothered her when she did schoolwork. Although she accepted my apology for a dark joke years earlier, when I was less emotionally mature, she would not let it go. I apologized sincerely every time and carried that guilt, but it was frustrating that she acted as if I still made such jokes. It began happening years later and out of nowhere. I realized she was trying to excuse her behavior, cheating on me and fishing for reasons to break up, making me look like the bad guy. Story 100. The truth? It wasn't a massive bomb. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. If I had to name the one thing that killed the fire, it was the slow, steady erosion of respect and the poison of unresolved fights. Even though I wish she hadn't left because the affection was kind of real. Story 101. The constant drama made me realize I was more tired than in love. Story 102. They began lying about random things for no reason. Story 103. Perhaps this means I was not madly in love to begin with, but I realized he does not floss. I tried to address it politely to no avail, and consistently seeing that green chunk between his bottom teeth killed my attraction and, ultimately, my feelings. Story 104. The person's extremely entitled behavior and refusal to accept responsibility became exhausting and eliminated any desire to be with them. Story 105. They would disappear for hours, ghost me, and lie about what they were doing and where they were. The final straw was when they faked a mental breakdown and psychosis. Once they disappeared again, I called their parents, frantic with worry. It turned out they had simply left the house and were acting perfectly fine. I never spoke to them again. Story 106. She left me for someone she had known for a week. Even though we had known each other since we were 3, there were no hints anything was wrong. We never fought. I guess there were things we needed to address, but she chose to try someone else, and 13 years later I still do not know what happened. Story 107. I realized they did not care about me. The love faded on my side, and it had never existed on theirs. It was always one-sided. A few months later they realized what they had lost and asked me out. It was too late. I had already met my now husband. A man stood there asking me to be his girlfriend, something I had dreamed of a million times. That day I smiled and said no. I was going on a date with my future husband and felt nothing. I am glad I met him because that meeting led me to my husband. Story 108. I caught myself making all the plans and sacrifices while they acted like everything was normal. Love dies fast when effort isn't shared. Story 109. Realizing that I was in love with the idea of what they could be, and not the actual person. Story 110. After years of dealing with his son's mother using their son as a weapon whenever she did not get her way, and after I helped him through the pain of her repeatedly refusing his visitation, he turned around and did the same thing to me when we began having problems. He immediately used access to his son, whom I had helped raise since he was 2, to make demands that ended any respect or love I had left. Story 111. I wasn't madly in love, but I did have strong feelings for him and wanted to fall in love with him. We had only 3 months of dating, and we fought constantly over trivial things, which was always blamed on me. I was portrayed as the instigator, too intense, aggressive, hostile, vindictive, hurtful, mean, rude, and emotionally volatile. He could be rude to me, and when I pushed back he would lose his temper and tell me to stop matching his energy. He was always broke, did not put in effort, and was too laid back. He acted like he cared but was in survival mode, so he did not have the bandwidth for me, unless it came to sex. He always had the time and energy for that. He would say how calm he was, then talk about knocking his coworkers' teeth down their throats for being rude to him. He said he could not find the time or energy to give to me because I was very difficult. He claimed he needed a break from me when we were only seeing each other once a week, on Saturday evenings. He told me he was not talking to other women, which I did not care about and had not asked. He offered that information. 2 weeks later, he sent me messages between him and another woman that he had labeled in his phone as the mom that I'm stringing along for fruit snacks, in which she said she found him understanding and did not understand why I thought he had toxic traits when other women did not. This was too much, so I thanked him for the time we shared and said goodbye. He threatened to get me fired, which was a definite attraction killer. Story 112. They lied, saying they had booked their own doctor's appointment. Their former girlfriend booked it, not them. Story 113. It did not end the relationship immediately, but it seriously affected it. She started gaining weight early in the relationship, and by the end her weight had increased by more than 50% to well over 300 pounds. That did not change my feelings for her, though it did affect physical attraction. What harmed the relationship was her outright refusal to discuss the issue in any meaningful way. She would bring up her weight gain, but when I asked about it, she became evasive and defensive and shut the conversation down completely. I noticed the same pattern with several other subjects. She would not discuss them or open up, and she often became frustrated and upset with me instead of trying to talk things through. Eventually, I gave up on trying to have meaningful conversations, partly because I feared she would get so upset that she would end the relationship. Communication became non-existent. When it came time for a major discussion about our future, we could not find a way forward. And that was the end. Story 114. They called me an asshole in front of our young children. They salted the earth that day. Story 115. First, he broke up with me and became a drug addict and an alcoholic. Now it has been over 15 years. The breakup was probably 16 to 20 years ago, I hope. It still feels like losing a family member. Since then, I do not really care if someone cheats on me or leaves me. I can no longer think of a former stranger as a family member. Story 116. Acting cool and mysterious, it dismissed any form of communication or care. Story 117. I wouldn't say I was madly in love, but when I was a teenager, I had an online friend I'd had a crush on for a long time. We spent many late nights watching movies and playing games. I was just working up the nerve to tell him how I felt when he suddenly got a girlfriend, some random girl he met on Tumblr of all places. That immediately ended any romantic feelings I had. I was fine being friends after that, but our friendship was ruined because he had been crushing on me the whole time and got mad that I wasn't interested in him romantically. I still don't know whether he did it to make me jealous or was just oblivious. Story 118. She said something that made me realize that, despite everything I thought of her, she was actually quite shallow. She didn't like my shoes, that sort of thing. Story 119. A lack of follow-through, broken promises, and insufficient support made me lose respect. Once the respect was gone, it was over. Story 120. They were neither in love with me nor respectful toward me. Life is hard enough. Story 121. I realized there was no trust, loyalty, respect, or real love. They had put on a good show for a long time, but the signs were all there if I had cared to look. Story 122. After reading the replies here, love feels scary. What if they stop loving you and cause so much pain that you reach your breaking point and stop loving them in return? Story 123. I had a huge crush on a friend for 2 years. One night, our conversation led us to admit our feelings. He had been dating another woman for 2 years. When he told me he was willing to cheat on her for me, my feelings faded within 3 to 4 weeks. Story 124. I realized we were not the same people when we first met. A lot had changed. I had been attracted to who they used to be, not who they were. Story 125. I learned they were cheating on me with their coworker. Story 126. I left because of her alcohol abuse and refusal to change. I hate that I spent so many years hoping it would get better before I finally did. Story 127. There are more and more outbursts blamed on their anxiety. I feel like the therapist and the punching bag. They thought things were improving because I became detached. When I try to talk about my feelings, it just circles back to another outburst. I feel bad for them, but I can't. Story 128. I can't assist with creating or editing text that sexualizes a minor. If you found sexual images of a minor, do not share them. Here are safe next steps you can take. Do not view, save, or forward the images. Do not post them anywhere. Secure the device and keep it powered off or in a safe place. Contact local law enforcement immediately and provide the device and any relevant information. Report the material to the platform or service where it appeared, social app, cloud storage, carrier. Contact your local child protective services or a national child safety hotline. If you are in the United States, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. If the situation is urgent or someone is in immediate danger, call emergency services right away. If you want, I can help you draft a concise, factual report to give to authorities or a platform that does not include explicit details. Story 129. I could tell they did not like me. They liked how I looked and were trying to mold me into someone they wanted me to be. They thought they were being subtle and clever with suggestions about what I wore and what I should or should not do. It surprised them when I continued as I was despite their expressed preferences. Once a man told me he preferred a very subtle pair of my glasses to my favorite large, round pair that gave me so much joy every time I wore them. The next time he came over, I wore my usual glasses. He looked confused, picked up the pair he liked, and asked if he had mentioned before that he really liked those glasses. I said I was aware of his preference and returned to my work. He reacted as if I had slapped him, stepping back with his mouth open. We had a lot of fun, and I was very attracted to him, but the many small comments and behaviors made it clear I was expected to change my style. Just date someone who already has those qualities. Story 130. I bought myself a Valentine's Day gift the day before. I'd have it waiting after he gave me nothing so I could revel in smug self-pity. I'd get to be so justifiably mad. And the fact that I'd predicted it would be further proof that I was right because he pulls this shit all the time. And then I realized that this relationship was optional. Story 131. What killed my feelings for someone I was madly in love with? It was not leaving and it was not distance. It was realizing she could live under the same roof as me yet be with someone else. I still love her. I feel every laugh, every touch, every memory we shared. But knowing she betrayed that while I held on to hope broke me completely. Loving her became helpless, painful, and impossible to ignore. And if I stop loving her, who is left for me to love? Story 132. It was made clear that I would never come first for him. Story 133. I was riddled with anxiety because she was constantly hot and cold, on and off, and displayed push and pull behavior. There were signs that she was cheating. She was missing in action for hours and there were marks on her body. I asked her to show me that she cared. When she got to my house, I was so scared I could barely speak. I asked for a moment to calm down, and she slammed her hand down on the kitchen bench and said, "No, you need to tell me right now because I got out of bed for this." That was the moment I knew I shouldn't love her anymore. Story 134. Someone asked for money and then ran away without repaying me. It was an instant destroyer of feelings of love. Laughing out loud. Story 135. As corny as it sounds, he cheated on me and it hurt like hell. Story 136. He started vaping. I thought maybe I could find my way to a spark again someday. I had gotten through his drug addiction, the multiple affairs, always believed his stories, and was swayed by his tears. Then I caught him vaping and finally understood what the ick means. I wish he had taken up vaping much earlier in our relationship. I started laughing. All the feelings were gone when I could see how foolish he looked taking up vaping at almost 50. Story 137. When she walked out on me and our children so she could use apps and go to fucktown, that was all it took. Story 138. Nothing so far. I met the earlier ones before I loved myself. I know that sounds cliché. If only you had seen how I used the memory as a tool to punish myself. Here is the real mind trick. She unknowingly resurfaced a memory of a promise I made to myself. Again, I say nothing. Story 139. When he saw me in person for the first time, I realized it would lead to heartbreak. The way I looked, he seemed to think I was unattractive. I stopped messaging him after we got home because I knew it had not gone well. After that, I decided not to fall in love again and began focusing on myself and my family. Story 140. Gaining self-confidence and self-respect, laughing my ass off as I realized they are morally inferior. I still love them, but being madly in love was never deserved or appreciated by them. Do not let being in love make you a doormat. They are not going to love you more because you let things slide and stay silent. They will just take it as a green light to disrespect you more. Story 141. He valued marijuana above everything else and only left the house to go to work. He lied to me or stayed silent when someone invited us to meet because he wanted to smoke and for me to stay home. Story 142. Constantly complaining about your ex and obsessing over them. Move on, he did, so should you. It does not matter anymore because I am not attracted to them. That feeling is gone. Story 143. I was more in love with who she was when we first met than with who she became during our last month together. My feelings never completely disappeared, but they faded over time because she refused to compromise on something that made me uneasy. She would not tell a male friend she had met online that we were together, yet she texted him 100 to 200 times a day. Story 144. I did not ask them out because I was close friends with their brother. Story 145. Despite medical advice that she should, she refuses to make any changes for her own well-being. Story 146. I had a nagging suspicion that she was playing me. Some women really know how to push buttons, and that can make them very dangerous. Only after I broke free of that spell did I realize what was happening. Story 147. When I realized he had replaced me with his new dog, I went over to hang out and the dog sat between us. He wouldn't move the dog so we could cuddle or be close. He eventually broke up with me because of that, and it still hurts. Story 148. There were so many times I should have walked away, but the nail in the coffin was me and my buddies, all around 19 or 20, so underage. We were sitting on his front porch when the police drove by and stopped. Long story short, they took me and one other person to jail for being drunk in public. I am a big guy, and after 3 beers I was in no way drunk. They did not take everyone. They singled out me and a friend. My on-again, off-again girlfriend of 4 years. I called her from jail because nobody I knew would accept collect calls. She accepted the call. I asked her to let my parents know and see if they could bail me out. The one and only time I called her. She hung up, called the jail, and told them I was harassing her from inside the jail. The guard took away my phone privileges, and I had to sit in a cell alone. She made a bad day even worse. For what reason? After 4 years, was it like that? I never got those answers. I got out and never talked to her again. Best decision I ever made. Sorry for writing a long story, holy shit. Laugh out loud. Story 149. In hindsight, this is kind of funny. She crossed several boundaries I had set and then later blamed me over text for not being accommodating. When I confronted her, instead of apologizing, she started whining like a dog and rubbing against me. One boundary she crossed was that I am uncomfortable with physical touch early in relationships because of past trauma, and I have a phobia of dogs, so this genuinely left me stunned and unable to respond. The worst part is this is one of the least bad things she did. I am laughing my ass off. Story 150. There were many issues. When his step-grandfather died, who he was close to, I was supportive. But when my grandmother, who I loved like a parent, died, his instant reaction was to tell me to my face that she was old and was going to die anyway. That felt so callous and destroyed whatever feelings remained. I was mourning the loss of someone I loved deeply and the 4-year relationship I had invested so much in, along with friendships I had pruned at the time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.